Hi, everyone. I'm Yolanda Caldera Durant, and I'm Director of Programs at Fund the People. And I'd like to welcome you to Fund the People's Toolkit webinar featuring the Bush Foundation. This is the second webinar that Fund the People has hosted, and it's part of a four-part series dedicated to talent investing for nonprofits that we're offering this year. And we actually have two more coming up in November and December. So again, thank you again for joining us for the Fund the People Toolkit webinar. And we're pleased to have Stephanie Andrews and Anita Patel from the St. Paul, Minnesota-based Bush Foundation join us. And also Syl Jones with...
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
And Syl Jones is with us. And he's a 2014 Bush Fellow. And we're excited to have you all present on today's webinar. So the Bush Foundation is profiled in our field stories, which is featured in our newly released free comprehensive toolkit on talent investing that was released last month. The field stories profile the experiences of 6 different types of funders from across the country who invest in nonprofit talent, and also the impact that it's had on their nonprofit partners, the communities that they serve, and also the issues that they care about. So I just want to walk you quickly through today's agenda. We're going to do a brief overview of Fund the People so you can learn more about our work in the campaign to boost investment in nonprofit professionals in the sector. We'll hear then about the Bush Foundation's top 5 lessons learned, and also the story of Syl and Syl's journey as a Bush Foundation Fellow. Then we'll pause for a Q&A and have some discussion. Then we'll talk about next steps. Our mission is to maximize investment in the nonprofit workforce. And we have a national campaign that's dedicated to ensuring that that there's an increase in investment in helping nonprofit professionals and organizations to do their best work. We focus primarily on foundations and nonprofits. Many of you may know, but for those of you that don't, the nonprofit workforce represents 11 million people in many different professional roles, including leaders, and many more who would like to join them. Supporting this workforce is vitally important now, especially when community needs have significantly increased and resources are diminishing, particularly for social service and social justice groups. So I want to walk you quickly through the strategies and tactics that Fund the People uses to carry out our campaign. First, we make the case, and we influence attitudes by making a compelling case for why it's important to invest in nonprofit talent. Secondly, we equip for action. So to do this, we design and distribute practical tools, trainings, and other resources to empower funders and nonprofits to what we call and what our President and CEO, Rusty Stahl, who's joined us today, has coined as baking in talent investing into the strategies, practices, and attitudes of funders and nonprofits. And thirdly, we work to build a movement. We work to build a critical mass of champions in the field who treat nonprofit professionals as the most important asset in the sector. So I think it's important to define what we mean by talent investing. And it's a word that was really needed in order to describe what is the intentional deployment of resources to support and develop professionals and leaders in the nonprofit workforce. And you can actually find this definition and others in our glossary of terms that is part of the toolkit, and that's available online. We designed the glossary of terms because we felt that there was important language that needed to be created in order to describe this important issue, and also to increase the visibility of supporting nonprofit professionals and organizations. Okay, so I wanted to talk very quickly about the top reasons to invest in nonprofit talent. And as you see in this graphic, at the top is all about investing in people. And when you invest in people, you have increased performance, and increased performance helps to strengthen nonprofit organizational effectiveness. And it also helps to create great places to work. And then moving along the continuum, investing in nonprofit talent helps to increase impact. And this clears the leadership bottleneck, harnesses diversity, and ensures intergenerational collaboration. As the workforce is getting increasingly diverse in terms of ages of people that are actually in the field working together. And then beyond that is increasing sustainability. So we believe that investing in the nonprofit workforce helps to expand the nonprofit workforce's value to society and advances long-term sustainability. So we also wanted to just take a step back and talk about what's actually wrong and why we're talking so much about the need to increase investment in the nonprofit workforce. So what's wrong is that the current reality is that 1% of foundation grant dollars support talent development. And this is based on Foundation Center data. For a quick snapshot, the Weinberg Foundation, that's also featured in our Field Story series, they did a poll of their grant applicants in 2016, and they found among all the applications that they received that 1% of the organization, that the organizations allocated 1% or less of their budgets to professional development. So this is certainly a snapshot, but something that we want to see change with this campaign to maximize investment in the nonprofit workforce. So it's time to turn this current reality around. Funders and nonprofits all have a role to play in making that possible. And this is the reason that we're featuring the Bush Foundation story and their experiences with investing in nonprofit talent. A resource that we want to make sure that you're all aware of and that you all access is our new Fund the People Toolkit. And here you'll find, and hopefully you had a chance to read the Bush Foundation field story prior to today's webinar. And if not, the field story is available for you, and also the rest of the series that includes 5 other foundations. But we want to invite you to continue your learning about talent investing by accessing several additional resources that are part of the toolkit. We have discussion guides that are created for funders to talk about talent investing within their organizations. We also have Talking Talent for Nonprofits, another discussion guide that is geared toward nonprofits to start having these conversations internally. And then we also designed Talking Talent between funders and nonprofits for those funders and nonprofits that want to talk more about what those particular needs are when they talk about wanting support and needing support for talent investing. And it's also a tool to help open up the dialogue to actually have these conversations that aren't happening nearly enough, especially given the recent data point that I shared. We've also released the Guide to Investing in Grantee Talent, and that's designed for funders to learn more about how they can actually bake in talent investing into their grant making, with a particular focus on, building in talent investing into programmatic grants, into capacity building grants, and also general operating support grants. So there are many ways that funders can do this. You'll also find, and I invite you to look at our resources on equity and inclusion. We've released a statement about the intersection of equity and inclusion with talent investing, and one relies significantly on the other. So we see this as a value for Fund the People and a value for talent investing overall. You'll also find a literature review and an annotated bibliography. So we hope that you have a chance to look at that. So now to the main event. We are very excited to introduce you to Stephanie Andrews, who is Talent Development Director of the Bush Foundation. And I'd just like to tell you quickly about Stephanie's background. As Talent Development Director, Stephanie provides both strategic direction and individual coaching and support with the goal of amplifying the foundation's strategies and the impact in the communities it serves. She designs and implements inclusive recruitment and selection processes, comprehensive professional development strategies, and effective engagement and evaluation systems to help to drive growth and productivity of the Foundation's talented staff. Stephanie also directs the Foundation's work with the Ron McKinley Philanthropy Fellowship, which is a multi-site initiative that provides an on-ramp into philanthropy for people traditionally underrepresented in the sector. And then sitting right next to Stephanie is Anita Patel. And Anita is a Leadership Programs Director. And she works with a wonderful team to equip, inspire, and connect leaders in order to strengthen their region. She brings a significant record of accomplishments to the Foundation, including 10 years of developing a wide range of leadership and inclusion programs as the Vice President for Racial Justice and Public Policy at the YWCA of Minneapolis. In 2011, Anita received the Hubert H. Humphrey Public Leadership Award presented by the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. And then last but not least, we're joined by Syl Jones, a 2014 Bush Fellow and also Director of Narrative Health at Hennepin County Medical Center. And Syl Jones is director, has been director there, and he's a 2014 Bush Fellow. And very interestingly, he's been a playwright, journalist, and also communications consultant for many years. He currently teaches interns, residents, and department heads to use narrative resources in advancing patient and provider health. Syl began his career as a medical journalist for Modern Medicine magazine and is the author of more than 60 plays for various theaters, including The Guthrie, Mixed Blood, Children's History, and Penumbra. His consulting career included work with Wyeth Pharmaceuticals, Burger King Corporation, Kerr McGee, Honeywell, and other organizations seeking to advance enterprise-wide culture. So we're very excited to have all our guest speakers today.
I'm going to take it away from here then. This is Stephanie Andrews, as you can see. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the Bush Foundation and then turn it over to Anita to talk more about some of the things we've learned that you've seen in the field story, hopefully. And then we really want to both get out of the way so that we can hear from Syl. I'm excited for him to share his story with you. Just a little bit about the Bush Foundation. We are a place-based funder. What we do is invest in great ideas and the people who power them in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and the 23 Native nations that share that same geography. About 40 people on our staff. That's all of us at a recent all-staff retreat. And we do this work because, as it said, and you've heard Yolanda talk about some similar things, we do the work that we do to inspire and support creative problem solving within and across sectors to make our region better for everyone. The way that we do that is in two ways: supporting people and organizations working on any issue that is most important to their communities, having them really define what's most important. And then we also work to advance some specific issues that are a priority to the Foundation. That's through our strategic initiatives. We're really going to focus today on that top bullet about supporting people and organizations working on any issue, because and especially on the people side of things. We've been investing in people since the Foundation began nearly 60 years ago. The Foundation our benefactor is Archibald Bush, who was one of the early founders of the 3M company. Right now we have a asset base of about $1 billion. We grant out about $45 million a year. And as I said, there are about 40 people working at the Bush Foundation. We've done that intentional investment in people for so long because we really believe that the major opportunity and the constraint in our region is the talent and capacity of our people. And so we are so clear that anything that we want to get done or that we want to support really depends on whether the talent is here and ready to do it. We do that in a couple of different ways. I'm going to really quickly go through the top programs that we have here around investment in talent. And then we can certainly answer more later if you have more questions. But the flagship talent investment program that we have is the Bush Foundation's Fellowship Program. It's been around for most of the Foundation's existence, with a lot of different variations along the way. But right now, we're really focusing on flexible funding to build capacity in individuals, however they define that. And so It's a up to 2-year program, fellowship program, up to $100,000, and it's very competitive. We award about 24 of these a year. This year we have 751 applicants for that program, so very competitive, and we really do try to think about how we support that whole application process being useful to people's development, because it is a lot of people we say no to. Anita leads that program. You're going to hear more from her, and Syl Jones, as you heard, was one of the 2014 fellows who came through that very competitive process, and we were thrilled to select him. Next is the Change Network, another program that Anita leads, really turning the focus on development and intercultural skills to an organizational context. So we focus on organizations, but really are, again, really thinking about the people involved in that and the skills they can develop. We also, through our communications team, which is really a program team here at the foundation, we do major event scholarships. So we send groups of between 25 and 50 people to major events and meetings, giving them a chance to build their networks, get inspired, learn some skills. Events like the Aspen Ideas Festival, the Independent Sector, Pop Tech, others like that. We also, as you heard, founded a program here called the Ron McKinley Philanthropy Fellowship. And that is a program that's now run by the Minnesota Council on Foundations, sitting right now in as many as 8 foundation sites across the Twin Cities. A way to bring high potential leaders of color into the philanthropy profession, give them a chance to try out grant making, see if it's what they want to do, and hopefully find a way to increasingly diversify the sector. We also began in 2009 the Native Nations Rebuilders Program, a talent investment program, a cohort leadership development program to give the chance for people from the 23 nations in our region to come together, to learn together, and really then be supported and inspired, equipped to go back to their tribal communities and continue to lead the change that they're trying to make in governance, economic, and education issues. And then finally, the work that I lead here at the foundation is around building those internal links between our external strategy. And so we invest generously and deeply in those people that you see on the screen there, thinking about them again as capacity that we have in this region that we want to support. And so we expect people to come in, learn some great stuff here, and then really encourage helping people find a way to take that to the community, maybe in a job outside of the foundation, but certainly so that they're building their own leadership capacity while they're here. And that's what I have. I'm going to turn it over now to Anita to take you a little deeper.
All right, thank you. So I will start by just kind of reviewing those top lessons that came from the field story. As you heard Stephanie say, we're going to stay somewhat high level so that you can hear more from Syl about his experience and story. But in case you didn't memorize those 5 lessons learned, they were to learn continuously, that leadership development and really investing in people has to be part of any strategy, that leadership and equity that leadership and equity and inclusion have to be one and the same, that we must look at our work as long-term, and we have to push for the personal. So let's get a little bit more into each of those, and I know those of you looking at the screen are seeing a lot of things swaying back and forth. We'll just keep going, and we'll see if the technology catches up with us. So learning continuously. We have a culture of learning, we have a culture of evaluation here at the Bush Foundation. And so the way we think about that is that evaluations aren't really intended to prove whether a program or a person was a success or not, but rather to think about what are those lessons learned, how can we continue to refine our programs, and what can we share and contribute to the field. So I think one of the critical questions of many that we ask ourselves is about what do we really need to know to fit that kind of philosophy versus what do we want to know? Because if you're an organization with a culture of evaluation, you probably recognize that struggle of we want to know so much, but really what are those essential pieces? Because anytime we're asking for data from our fellows or grantees, that's an effort that we're asking them to put forward. So we want to be really conscious about that. The second piece around leadership development, really thinking about investing in people as part of any strategy, is that we hold closely the idea that anytime we're making a grant to support a project or an organization, we're actually making a grant to the people who power that work. So even if we make a grant to our local council of nonprofits, we're really funding the folks who work at that council and the folks that the council supports. So thinking about that critical question of how can we be responsive to what people need to do that work well. So I'll move to number 3 shortly. I'll just say one other thing about investing in people. And part of it has been thinking about how we can be responsive to our communities and the events that are happening in our community as in many of your communities, and thinking about not only those kind of long-term process grants, but what are some of the more rapid response things we can do. I know many of you are probably thinking about that as well. Love to learn from you and talk about it more in the Q&A if that's interesting to you. Moving on to the idea that leadership and equity and inclusion work have to be one and the same. We really believe that the definition of leader in any setting has to include the ability to lead in equitable ways, right? That a leader has to understand how to help organizations, systems thrive, and that each person, each individual who exists within that organization, system, or even geographic region really has what they need to thrive. So some of the critical questions we ask ourselves are, who gets recognition and support? Are our Bush Fellows only those folks who continually are getting all of the kind of known awards in a community? Or are we looking at who are the folks who are making change in different ways in communities, and how can we recognize that leadership in different ways? And also thinking about how are we contributing either consciously or unconsciously to the ability to move these values forward, or in the reverse, how are we consciously or unconsciously contributing to systems of oppression and making sure that we're talking about that in our programs. The fourth piece is really looking at the work as long-term. And when I say the work, that can be that commitment to equity. We all know that that's long-term and that it's not going to be done in one workshop or in 2 workshops, but really thinking about our strategy as a whole and how do we celebrate along the way, because there is always going to be more to do, and we can learn from those points of both celebration and of, we really wish we could have done that better. And part of our culture of learning is also to specifically create learning papers and reflection points that help us share that not only within the foundation, but outside of our walls as well. And then thinking about the grants and the fellowship work as long-term investments. This pairs with our evaluation conversation, but really expecting that the investment in people is not going to be fully realized in the year or 2 that the grant term is about, but that this could be a decades-long investment. And I think that one of the critical questions and pieces there is, how is our board involved in that philosophy? Do they expect to see evaluation results 6 months in, a year in? And if they do, how can we have a conversation about what's the appropriate types of things to evaluate or to talk about? And is there a way to look at the longitudinal effects of grant dollars over time? The last piece is around pushing for the personal. And I know we'll hear about this from Syl, but really thinking about the fact that we see leadership development as driven by, but kind of outside of, a commitment to an issue or an organization. That we think about and ask leaders to think about how they will be strong and effective no matter what they're working toward. So a critical question for us is how to help leaders, particularly in the fellowship, but also in some of our other work, break free from that construct of we are always asking you to think about a project and move more into what will you need to be as effective as possible no matter what you're working on. That can be hard and a different conversation if you're working with folks who come from a more individual versus communal approach, and we have those conversations as well about how really strengthening yourself or a particular leader affects the community, and that communal piece is part of it. But that's definitely a conversation we have. the last thing I'll say is we've had a lot of conversations about our current political environment, and I'm sure many of you are doing the same. And I thought it was interesting in some of our prep calls, the fact that what we are very conscious of is that our region, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and the 23 Native nations that share that geography, votes in very different ways, which means that as we see turmoil, as we see pain, we also see excitement and we see hope. And so thinking about our investments in leaders as how do we help them hold multiple perspectives? How do we help them connect across sector, across difference, understanding that there is not one perspective across our region about what's happening in our world today. So that calls us to really think about how we as a foundation navigate that and how we support leaders in our region to thrive in a time of deep conflict. So I think with that, we will hold on the rest of kind of our conversation to really turn it over to Syl. I ask you to just open your hearts and minds to Syl. He has an amazing story to tell, and we'll all come back together for a Q&A at the end.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Stephanie. I hope you can all hear me. I'm not going to be using many slides. I just want to use the old-fashioned method of telling you a story. And I'm really happy to talk about my experience with the Bush Foundation and its policy of investing first in people and how it's transformed my life. And I'm going to start at JFK Airport. You know, I've been called one of the most mature individuals to ever receive the Bush Fellowship. And I don't think that when they say maturity, they're talking about emotional maturity, because about 3 years ago at JFK Airport, I was an emotional basket case. I'd received the Bush Fellowship Award, which I'd planned to use to get a master's degree in narrative medicine at Columbia University. And that's why I'd come to New York. And I was determined to convince the admissions committee to admit me to Columbia and their relatively new narrative medicine program, which I really coveted. And for me, the stakes were pretty high. I felt a little bit like a kid again, trying to gain admission to an Ivy League school, except this time, unlike when I was 17 years old and my parents had given me $200 and their blessing but little else, I had the money I needed to enroll thanks to the Bush Foundation. So for the first time in my life, money was not going to be a determining factor in my education. And I prepared myself for virtually every question the admissions committee could ask me. I was really ready to wow them. But about 20 minutes of lively discussion into our meeting, the head of the admissions committee said to me, you know, we've read some of your plays, your book, your application, letters of recommendation. We think you have fabulous experience, but you don't really need to enroll in our program. In fact, the things you're doing are exactly what our narrative medicine graduates aspire to do. You're already doing it. Well, I wasn't sure I heard her correctly. I wondered if they were actually rejecting my application, and I asked directly, and they said, no, you're qualified. In fact, you're overqualified. Now, I heard their words, but I was a little confused. It was kind of like trying to get into the musical Hamilton and being told that I'd already lived the part of Alexander Hamilton, so I didn't need to see the play. And the committee chair said, well, you might want to think about whether you'd like to come to our narrative medicine seminars here in New York instead of enrolling in a degree program. Now, the seminars are for professionals already engaged in medicine and law and the arts who want to add narrative skills to their professional practice. And then she said, well, maybe you could help us understand more about how other ways to use narrative medicine, what they look like in the field. So I was flabbergasted. While waiting for the airplane to take me back to the Twin Cities, I called two people, my wife and Stephanie Andrews. My wife said she agreed with the committee, which wasn't really helpful at that time. And Stephanie said that although this was an unexpected turn of events, I shouldn't let it bother me. She said, we're investing in you. We'll think of other ways that you can have impact, the impact that you want to have. So yes, Columbia sent me a letter accepting my application, but my task was to really figure out my independent path forward. And so using my own methods and applying what I learned from the Columbia professional seminars, I somehow found my voice. I flew to those seminars in New York. I discovered that there were dozens of people like me from all over the world who wanted to do what I was doing, except, interestingly, very few of them were actually writing plays and films with medical themes. They were primarily doctors and nurses and others. The Bush Fellowship allowed me to volunteer my time to community agencies and organizations that were focused on undoing historical trauma and the chronically ill people who were suffering as a result. And I also learned that patient and provider stories seldom get heard completely in clinics and hospitals. And the result is a great deal of dissatisfaction across the entire healthcare continuum. Gradually, over less than a year, I spoke to community groups. I met people in healthcare organizations who were intrigued by what I was doing. And I was doing all this as a volunteer with the help of the Bush Fellowship. And at one of those community meetings, the CEO of Hennepin County Medical Center, a large safety net hospital and a level 1 trauma center, came up to me after I spoke and said, hey, why don't you come and see me and we can talk about what you're doing? It turned out that he'd also been a Bush Fellow a few years earlier, so he understood and appreciated the program. And HCMC, as it's known in the community, trains over 50% of all providers in the state of Minnesota. And in 2015, they hired me as a resident fellow in narrative medicine. And they took advantage of the fellowship funds I received. They paid me on a half-time basis. But the CEO had a very interesting idea. He not only hired me, he put me on the executive leadership team. So imagine that as an outsider. You know, what I did was I began to question the way our executive leaders made decisions. And I helped team members to think more humanely about the policies and procedures that we implemented as a hospital. So now, flash forward, as Director of Narrative Health and Medicine here, this is what I'm doing. I'm teaching narrative medicine techniques to interns, residents, and department heads, which could be a full-time job in and of itself. I'm also part of an international research team sponsored by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that works with medical professionals in the Netherlands to compare health and social services spending. In fact, our first paper was published last month in the British Medical Journal. I'm helping reshape our organizational narrative so that the community understands who we really are and what we do as a healthcare system. And as part of that effort, I'm working on launching a new brand campaign with a PR agency. I've been fortunate enough to be able to write 3 new plays about healthcare that have all been produced by Mixed Blood Theater Company here in Minneapolis. And these plays have been eye-opening experiences for our leadership, who now want to incorporate the arts into much of what we do as a healthcare system. And I produce all of the hospital's videos on our Light Up the Night Gala, which is our biggest fundraising night of the year. Last year, we raised well over $500,000. So in short, I'm telling stories that have a therapeutic impact on patients, staff, providers, and other stakeholders. And I'm charged generally with improving the narrative competency of our organization from the top down. The Bush Fellowship and the flexibility that it afforded me showed me that I already knew and understood a great deal about narrative medicine. So although the circumstances that evolved at Columbia University were unexpected, it really challenged me to hang out a shingle and see what would happen. And as a result, I expanded my network exponentially. I now have friends and colleagues in New York and San Francisco, the Netherlands, Sweden, all over the globe, actually. I'm also mentoring half a dozen students. Some of them are medical students, some of them are artists who are called to do what I've been trying to do, which is to bring the healing power of the humanities into the challenging world of medicine and health. And this is just a short list of what the Bush Fellowship has done for me. The Bush Foundation's investment and its flexibility allowed me to work at my own pace, to find my own way in a new world, a world where stories contain the seeds of health and of healing, and also the roots of illness, a world that I believe I was probably born to inhabit. I'll say one more thing. You know, we really need to teach medicine differently so that the capacity to co-produce healthcare is nurtured in medical school, and so that person and family-centered, trauma-informed care is driven by compassionate curiosity. And that's one of my biggest goals for the next couple of years here. So I'd like to say thank you to the foundation and also to Fund the People for this opportunity to talk about my experience. And I hope you get the sense that the foundation's generous grant propelled me to where I am now. And it's really allowing me to help others to pursue their dreams in narrative medicine and health. So I'd be happy to answer any questions any of you might have at this point.
Thank you, Syl. Thank you for sharing your story with us. And as Syl said, we're now at our Q&A section. And I want to open up the space for people to ask their questions. So why don't we make sure that you're unmuted if you have if you've muted yourself so that we can hear you ask your question. Okay, so so there is a question from Rusty. He says, "Syl, thanks for sharing your story. What is the response you get from infusing humanities into a scientific field, even as the world and our institutions seem to get more technology and management oriented?"
That's a really good question. The response varies. We have a group called the Hennepinites, who are former doctors who've worked here, who are 75, 80 years old. When I talk to them, they are extremely enthusiastic, and they say, finally, somebody's putting the story back in medicine. When I talk to younger people, residents, it's the same kind of reaction. But those in the middle, it's very difficult because they don't necessarily think in that way. And so I've had to work with our administration. Oftentimes I'm greeted by people with crossed arms who are scientists and somehow think that science and art don't go together. Oftentimes I can get them to change their minds within about 20 minutes, but sometimes not. So we do have some resistance to that, but that's okay. The world is changing, and more young people are convinced that they need to carry their humanity into the room with them when they're doing their examinations of patients.
Thank you, Syl. I think your story is very powerful, and I think what resonated was when you were asked to serve on the leadership team, stepping into your role at HCMC. And I was curious about how what you took from the Bush Fellowship prepared you to step into that role.
Well, I have worked in executive leadership teams before, but it was quite different because this is a hospital. It's very hierarchical. The CEO, I think, really wanted to shake up the executive leadership team. So the first few times that I appeared at the round table where there are 20 people, there were a lot of frowns, I'll put it that way. But the question was kind of implied, what have you done to earn being here? But what I started to do was actually sort of interrupt a lot of the dialogues that were going on around the table where there was not very much humanity or emotional intelligence being shown. And I was able to get people to talk more about their stories as leaders. And what we really did is we wound up building a more effective leadership team. But that took about a year. And I think as of now, I think things are fine. And nobody questions why I'm at that table.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So we have a question from Abby Saloma at the Schusterman Family Foundation. She is curious about, this question is for Anita and Stephanie. She's curious what the foundation's goals are with regards to connecting fellows to each other, particularly if they are working in different sectors. Do they want support? Do you want and do you support cross-cohort collaboration?
Yeah, great question. I think you've hit on something we talk a lot about. And so I'll kick it off, and Stephanie, please feel free to add in. Yes, connecting fellows to each other is really important. And we do some, and we ask fellows to do some of their own as well. So with fellowship classes, they come together about 3 times during their fellowship period. And really, particularly that first launch retreat, which is the first time they're all together as fellows, spend a lot of time just helping them to talk about who they are, how they're hoping to grow, and to connect with each other. Of course, throughout their fellowship time, there are other places, particularly online, where they're continuing to connect with each other, both around the ideas that they're pursuing in their various sectors and about the growth, the leadership growth and transformation that they're experiencing. So they become support, inspiration, challengers for one another. Another piece that we have available for folks is a searchable function on our website of fellows. Now, I will be the first to claim that it is not the most comprehensive or user-friendly, so it's clearly in the Learn Continuously lesson that we have, we talk about a lot, how could we do a better job to make it easier for fellows to connect with each other. And on the other side of that, what we've seen is that when fellows take the initiative to find one another, particularly across classes, Syl mentioned the network of fellows that exist, when they take that kind of initiative themselves, that is often a longer lasting and more collaborative engagement. So we're trying to walk that line of creating a supportive container, understanding where our resources should go, so having some conversation about, do we put more resources into formal ways of connecting fellows and those who are both active fellows and those who've completed their quote-unquote fellowship term? And or do we put resources into cultivating more leaders and more kind of leadership development with folks who are not currently fellows? So we wrestle with that. And I don't know that we've found a perfect answer. It's something that I know I'm committed to continuing to work on, and Stephanie and I have had conversations. So you've got some good ideas. We talk about that a lot in leadership development spheres of what is the right connection point for quote unquote alumni of programs.
I just want to add in that I think that yes to all of that, and really that Syl shared such a great example of where he was speaking and a former Bush fellow heard him, and that became the door opening to this amazing experience. I think that the visibility, we work really hard on trying to raise up the profiles of people who are selected and encourage them from the beginning to connect with what is now about 2,500 people in the region who've come through the program in one of its different iterations. And so the power of that visibility is, I think, increasingly something that fellows are taking advantage of. Social media makes it easier, and that's wonderful. As Anita said, it's always a constant struggle to figure out how to support the interest, and also not we could do that full time, another 20 of us. The interest is limitless on connecting alumni with each other, and it's really great when it happens organically, and we want to be there all we can without being part of that.
Great, thank you, Stephanie and Anita. So we have a few more questions to take us, continue us through our Q&A. So Kristen Ruff from Philanthropy New York, question is for Anita and Stephanie. What messages or learnings have sustained your board's continued commitment to leadership development?
I'm sorry, I couldn't totally hear that. So you said what messages have sustained our, what was that?
So what messages or learnings have sustained your board's continued commitment to leadership development?
What messages have sustained our cohort's continuous learning to leadership development?
Your board.
Our board, thank you.
Yes, your board.
Yeah, it's really related to what we've been talking and what Syl showed you so well. The stories are so compelling that I think they understand it at both an emotional level, and also they see the impact of all the amazing people who come through the programs every day. And as a Bush Foundation board member, so many of the fellows make the case themselves for the program in the connections that they have with board members as they thank them, as they run into them in community activities. And so we're really fortunate, I think, and it also is absolutely something you could expect to have happen with deep investment in people. Those people do great things and the board gets inspired by them. We also include them in some of our selection activities. So I think that's also one of the ways that there's a continuing refreshment of people's understanding of the program and their commitment to it, because they get to be in the room, they wrestle with the amazing wealth of leadership that we have, even in the people we turn down. And that, I think, every time leads them to be more and more committed to the way that we invest in people. And that's not only in the fellowship program. We do many of those things in the others as well. But they see it, and that is a great benefit to the program.
I think that's right on. We did one thing that I think the board really enjoyed, which was we did a mock selection at a board meeting so that all of the board members could get a sense of the caliber of applicants, of what it takes to really wrestle with that short-term deliverable and long-term investment in a leader. And so just continually trying to think of ways to reinforce our philosophy around this and being very conscious of how we bring them into the fold of that.
Yeah, fantastic. And almost as if on cue, Ken Saxon from Leading From Within asks the Bush Foundation folks about trying to developmentally support people that they can't take into their program, and how do you do that? So for the people that don't get accepted, how do you support them?
Yeah, there's a couple ways, there's a number of ways we think about that. I'll outline a few. One is taking very seriously our application process for any of our programs, and I can speak to the leadership development programs, thinking of the application itself as a process of honing your own leadership kind of vision, thinking about that as a reflective space for the leader. So it's not just what do we need to know, but how can this be something valuable for the individuals themselves. Another two things, and then I'll ask Stephanie to join in. But the second piece I would say is being very conscious of how can we share the lessons, the journeys that people are going through, and not just fellows, but also our grantees. So on our website, you can find quote unquote learning logs, and those are public entries that really talk about a grantee's experience with their grant, a fellow's experience of their leadership journey, thinking about how can we share, inspire, equip leaders through those investments that we're already making. And then the final thing I'll say is that we're very clear about feedback, that when people apply to our programs, we find some way to get them feedback. Now, of course, with the Bush Fellowship Program, if you have 751 applications, you're probably not going to be able to do individual feedback with each person. So kind of that first round, we do a feedback webinar where we take the themes from the selection committee and share those with folks who are interested in receiving feedback. Semi-finalists and beyond, which is about 60 to 75 folks, all get individual feedback if they desire. Of course, we're not going to force it, but thinking about those ripple effects of, you know, selection committee members took the time to read applications, individuals took the time to share their hopes and their dreams, and so what can we learn from one another as we go forward? I'll pause there and invite Stephanie in.
I have nothing to add to that. That's great.
Great. Okay. So I don't see any other questions, but this is your last chance if you want to jump in and chat us a question or unmute yourself and ask a question. Okay. All right, great. Well, thanks everybody for the questions that you asked our presenters. So let's move on. So I'm sharing contact information for all our speakers, Stephanie, Anita, Syl, myself. If there are questions that you have that you want to ask offline, please take down our email addresses. We will also share the slide deck with everyone post-presentation and a link to the webinar recording so that you can, if there's something you want to see again, or if you want to share it with your colleagues, at your organization or more broadly, we invite you to do that. So we also want you to know where you can find us on social media. So we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and also on Instagram. This is a great way to follow news and information about the toolkit, also our webinars and other learning opportunities that we provide on talent investing. And as far as next steps, after this webinar, there are a few. We will be sending with the slide deck a link to a webinar survey so that you can share your feedback with us about today's webinar, what was helpful to you, what was challenging as far as the information that you heard today, and also any ideas that you have for future topics for webinars. The toolkit, which I've talked about and pointed you to earlier in today's webinar, can be found at fundthepeopletoolkit.org. And the only thing that we ask that you share is your basic contact information so that we can keep you informed of new materials that we add to the toolkit, and also learning opportunities related to the toolkit and any updates to the resources that are currently there. The other update has to do with 2 other webinars that we'll have to round out 2017. The webinar coming up on November 17th features the New York Community Trust, and they'll be talking about their investment in building nonprofit professionals and leaders through their fellowship program. And we'll be joined by Pat Swan, who's the Senior Program Officer who manages that program. And also Sharice Bullock-Bailey, who is a graduate of the New York Community Trust Fellows Program. And then on December 12th, we'll be joined by the Community Memorial Foundation, and they're based in Illinois, and they have been investing in nonprofit talent in a lot of different and holistic ways, both from investing in leaders to helping to support entire organizations with their talent development needs. So you'll hear all about that on December 12th. You should have received an update by email with links to help you register for that, but I'll also include that in our follow-up communication about today's webinar. And then as far as upcoming presentations, these are live in-person presentations getting out off of the webinars. We have 2 coming up. I'll be presenting at the National Forum on Family Philanthropy, so if any of you are participating there, I'll be joined by the Cricket Island Foundation and the Parent Family Foundation to talk about those foundations and their experiences with supporting nonprofit talent. And then Rusty Stahl, our president and CEO, and myself will be at Independent Sector Conference, and that is happening in late October. So we'll be sharing more details about that as well. So with that, it looks like we're a little bit before our end time. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I'd like to again thank our presenters, Syl Jones, and also Anita Patel and Stephanie Andrews at the Bush Foundation. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you also, Stephanie and Anita, for sharing your story with the public through the Field Story series. I think a lot of people may not know about your work. I mean, I certainly didn't before I joined Fund the People. So glad we have the ability to share your work widely. And thank you for your willingness to share your stories.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. So with that, we're going to close, and we wish everybody a great day, and we hope to see you again in November and December.